Most men don't fall apart in one moment. They fall apart in 1,000 small surrenders nobody else ever sees. The snooze button hit for the 4th time. The apology that never gets said. The goal quietly abandoned and never mentioned again. And the strange part is, from the outside, everything still looks fine. The job is still there. The smile still shows up in photos. But inside, something has gone quiet. A kind of slow erosion where a man stops expecting much from himself and starts calling that acceptance. Here's what almost nobody tells you. That erosion is not a character flaw. It's a default setting. The human mind, left unmanaged, drifts toward comfort, toward avoidance, toward the path of least resistance. And 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers figured out exactly why this happens and exactly what to do about it. Not motivational slogans, not hustle culture noise. A working system tested in prisons, in exile, in the middle of plagues and wars, by men who had every reason to give up and didn't. I'm going to walk you through that system today. Not the watered-down quote card version you've seen 100 times. The actual mechanics. Because Stoicism was never really about being unbothered or emotionless. That's the caricature. The real thing is closer to a discipline for rebuilding a man from the inside, brick by brick, using nothing but attention and choice. If you've ever felt like you're capable of more than the life you're currently living, if you've ever caught yourself making promises to yourself that quietly expire, this is for you. Stick with me, because what I'm about to explain in the second half of this video is the part most people who talk about Stoicism never even get to. The actual daily mechanism that turns philosophy into a different kind of man. And if any of this is landing for you already, drop a comment and tell me where you're at right now. I read every one, and I want to know who's in this with me. Let's start at the foundation, because you can't build anything real on a shaky premise. There is a single idea sitting underneath everything the Stoics taught, and if you only take one thing from this entire video, take this. Epictetus, a man who spent part of his life enslaved before becoming one of history's sharpest thinkers, opened his most famous teaching with a division. Some things are up to us, some things are not. Full stop. That's the entire operating system. Your reputation is not up to you. Other people's opinions are not up to you. The economy, your genetics, what happened to you in childhood, how someone else reacts to your text message, none of that is up to you. What is up to you is narrower than you think, but it is absolute. Your judgments, your effort, your attention, your response. That's it. That's the whole list. And almost every ounce of unnecessary suffering a person carries comes from quietly refusing to accept that division. Think about the last time you were genuinely miserable for an extended stretch. Chances are, if you trace it back, you'll find you were fighting to control something that was never yours to control in the first place. Someone's opinion of you. An outcome that depended on 10 other people. The past. Stoicism isn't telling you to stop caring. It's telling you to stop spending your limited energy pushing against walls that don't move, so you have energy left for the door that actually opens. Here's why this matters for a man specifically trying to rebuild himself. Most self-improvement advice focuses on outcomes. Get the promotion. Get in shape. Get the relationship. But outcomes always involve variables outside your control. The market shifts. The other person has their own mind. Genetics play a role. When your sense of worth is tied entirely to outcomes, you are building your identity on ground that shifts under you constantly. That's exhausting, and it's also why so many men feel like they're working hard and still losing. The Stoic move is to relocate your target. Instead of aiming at, get the promotion, you aim at, prepare thoroughly, show up with full effort, communicate clearly. Those are yours. Nobody can take them from you, and nobody can hand you the failure that isn't about them. If the promotion doesn't come, you examine what was actually in your control and adjust it. If it does come, you don't credit luck alone, because you did the part that was yours to do. Marcus Aurelius, who ran an empire while writing private notes to himself that we now call meditations, kept coming back to this same idea in different forms. He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing to remind himself, every single morning, of the same basic truth, because the mind forgets it constantly and has to be retrained daily. That's an important detail. Even a Roman emperor needed to rehearse this daily. It doesn't become automatic. You practice it, or you lose it. So here's a practical way to start today. Next time you feel that familiar tightness of frustration or anxiety rising in your chest, ask one question before reacting. Is the thing upsetting me actually inside my control right now? If it isn't, the discipline is not to suppress the feeling, but to redirect the energy toward the one lever you do have, which is your next action. That single habit, repeated for a few weeks, changes the texture of a person's daily life more than almost any other single practice I know of. But knowing where the line is isn't enough on its own, because most men know, on some level, what they should be focusing on. Knowing isn't the problem. The problem is what happens in the gap between knowing and doing, and that gap is where the real work of this philosophy actually lives. That's exactly where we're headed next, because the next part changes how you see every uncomfortable moment in your life, starting today. Here's a pattern worth noticing in your own life. The moments you avoid are almost never the moments that are actually dangerous. They're the moments that are simply uncomfortable. The hard conversation. The workout when you're tired. The task you've been putting off for 3 weeks that would take 20 minutes. Your brain treats discomfort as a stop sign, when in most cases it's closer to a doorway. Seneca, one of the clearest writers in the entire Stoic tradition, spent years in exile, stripped of his position and separated from his family, and later returned to serve at the highest levels of Roman politics before eventually being forced to take his own life under Nero's orders. Through all of that, one of his central arguments was that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. We rehearse catastrophe in our heads long before it happens, if it happens at all, and that rehearsal costs us far more than most real hardships ever do. Apply that to something as ordinary as a hard conversation you've been avoiding. With a business partner, a parent, someone you owe an apology to. Notice how much energy goes into avoiding it. The dread building for days. The rehearsed arguments in the shower. The mental fatigue of carrying it around unresolved. Compare that to the actual conversation itself, which almost always takes 15 minutes and is rarely as bad as the version you built in your head. The suffering wasn't in the event, it was in the anticipation, and the anticipation was optional. The Stoics had a specific practice for this called negative visualization, and it sounds counterintuitive at first. Instead of avoiding thoughts of things going wrong, they deliberately imagined loss, failure, and difficulty in a calm, controlled way ahead of time. Not to spiral, but to strip the fear of its power. When you've already sat with the thought of losing something and recognized you would survive it, that thing loses its grip over your daily decisions. You stop making choices out of fear of a worst case you've never actually examined. Try this the next time you're avoiding something specific. Sit for 2 minutes and actually walk through the worst realistic outcome, not the vague dread, the actual specific outcome. What would genuinely happen if that conversation went badly? What would you do the next day? Most of the time, you'll find the worst realistic case is survivable, uncomfortable, but not catastrophic. And once you've named it clearly, the vague fog of anxiety that was stopping you starts to clear. There's a second piece here that matters just as much. The Stoics didn't treat physical and mental discomfort as something to eliminate. They treated it as a kind of training equipment. Marcus Aurelius wrote about waking up already annoyed at the day ahead, anticipating difficult people and difficult tasks, and reminding himself that this was simply the raw material his nature was built to handle. Not a personal insult from the universe, just the job. This reframes something huge for anyone trying to build discipline. The version of you that skips the workout on the hard day isn't lazy in some abstract moral sense. He's simply treating discomfort as a signal to stop instead of a signal that the training is actually working. Discomfort in a workout, in a hard project, in a difficult conversation is not evidence that something is wrong. Often it's the exact evidence that something important is happening. Here's an unexpected shift worth sitting with. A lot of men chase the feeling of motivation, waiting for it to show up before they act. But motivation was never meant to be the starting point. Action creates motivation almost as often as motivation creates action. You don't wait until you feel ready for the hard conversation or the hard set at the gym. You do the rep, and the readiness catches up afterward. Waiting for the feeling first is how years slip by without the identity ever actually forming. This connects to something even bigger, something about how identity itself gets built. one small chosen action at a time rather than one big transformation. That's the part almost nobody explains clearly, and it's exactly where we're going next, because this is the actual mechanism, the real engine behind everything we've covered so far. Here is the root idea that changes how you think about self-improvement permanently. You are not building a new personality. You are accumulating a track record with yourself, one choice at a time, and that track record is what eventually becomes your identity. Every time you tell yourself you'll wake up early and then don't, you're not failing a single morning. You're casting a vote for the kind of person who doesn't follow through, and your mind quietly counts every vote. Epictetus put it directly. Every action either strengthens a habit or weakens it. There is no neutral repetition. Skip the run today, and you haven't just skipped one run, you've reinforced the version of yourself that skips runs when it's inconvenient. Show up on a day you don't feel like it, and you've cast a vote for the version of yourself who shows up regardless of mood. Over months, these votes accumulate into something that starts to feel less like willpower and more like identity. You stop having to convince yourself to go to the gym because you've become genuinely someone who goes. This is enormous, because it means the goal was never really the six-pack, the promotion, or the relationship. Those are downstream effects. The actual goal is becoming someone whose word to himself means something. A man who tells himself he'll do something and then does it, consistently, until his own self-trust becomes a stable foundation rather than something that wavers with his mood. Most of what people call low self-esteem is actually just an accurate internal record of broken promises to oneself. Here's a piece of this that most people miss entirely, and it might genuinely surprise you. The specific size of the action barely matters for this mechanism. A 5-minute walk counted as a vote for I follow through carries almost the same identity weight as a 45-minute workout, because the vote isn't measuring the output, it's measuring whether you did what you said you'd do. This is why the advice to start absurdly small is not a compromise for people without discipline. It's a deliberate strategy to stack up votes fast, especially at the beginning, when the track record with yourself is thin and needs rebuilding. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that captures this precisely. He said you don't have to be perpetually agitated by every setback, because you have the power to review your own principles daily and reset. That word, daily, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Not once. Not after a dramatic turning point. Daily. Identity gets rebuilt through repetition, not through a single decision made in a moment of inspiration. If you've been carrying frustration with yourself for a string of broken commitments, here is the practical shift. Stop trying to prove something big to yourself this week. Pick one small, almost embarrassingly small action, something you could do even on your worst day, and do it every single day without exception for the next 30 days. Not because the action itself changes your life, but because the vote does. You are rebuilding trust with the one person you'll spend your entire life with, which is yourself, and that trust is the actual foundation everything else gets built on top of. If any part of this is resonating with you, take a second right now and hit like on this video, and consider sharing it with someone in your life who's trying to rebuild their own discipline. This kind of thing matters more when more than one person is doing it, and it costs you nothing to pass it along. There's still one more layer here, and it might be the most important one in this entire video, because it explains what to actually do when you inevitably slip, which you will, because every single person building this kind of discipline slips at some point. What separates the men who keep going from the men who quietly give up isn't the absence of failure, it's what they do in the 10 minutes right after it. Every man who has ever built real discipline has also broken his own streak. He's skipped the workout, snapped at someone he loves, drank more than he intended, or gone back on a promise to himself. This is not the part anyone talks about, because it's not flattering, but it's the actual hinge point that determines everything. What happens in the 10 minutes after the failure matters more than the failure itself. Most men respond to a slip with one of two extremes, and both are traps. The first is harsh self-punishment, an internal voice calling them weak, undisciplined, a failure, which feels like accountability, but is actually just cruelty wearing accountability's clothes. The second is total permission, deciding that since the streak is already broken, the whole day or the whole plan might as well be abandoned. Both responses guarantee the same outcome. The slip turns into a spiral. The Stoics had a completely different approach, and it's built on a simple but demanding standard: judge the action, not the person. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the most private and unguarded way a person can write, never once called himself worthless when he fell short. He examined the specific choice, asked what led to it, and moved immediately toward the next right action. No lingering in shame, no excusing it away either. Just an honest, almost clinical look at what happened, followed by a return to the standard. This distinction changes everything in practice. Shame says, "I am a failure," which is a verdict about your entire identity and offers no next step, just a heavier weight to carry. Accountability says that specific choice didn't match what I actually want for myself, and here is the next action, which is a diagnosis with a clear path forward. One keeps you stuck. The other moves you forward within minutes. The gap between successful and unsuccessful attempts at building discipline is almost never about who slips less. It's about who returns to the standard faster. There's a phrase worth carrying with you for exactly this moment, adapted from how the Stoics approached daily failure. Today I did not meet my own standard, and tomorrow the standard is still there waiting, unchanged, uninterested in yesterday. The wanting matters more than the winning. The direction matters more than any single day's execution, and the daily return to that direction is the entire game. Here's something that might genuinely surprise you about how this plays out over a real timeline. Men who track their consistency honestly, including their failures, almost always outperform men who quietly hide their slips from themselves and pretend the streak was never broken. Honest tracking keeps the standard visible. Hidden failure lets the standard quietly erode without you noticing, until months later you look up and realize the version of yourself you were building has disappeared entirely, and you can't even pinpoint when it happened. So build this into your actual practice starting tonight. At the end of each day, take 30 seconds and ask 2 questions honestly. Where did I meet the standard I set for myself today, and where did I fall short? No self-punishment in the second answer. Just an honest account, followed by 1 sentence about what you'll do differently tomorrow. That's the entire practice. It takes less time than scrolling through a single set of notifications, and done consistently, it becomes the mechanism that catches every small drift before it turns into the kind of erosion we started this video talking about. We've covered the core division between what's yours to control and what isn't. We've covered why discomfort is signal, not a verdict. We've covered how identity actually gets built through small accumulated votes. And now we've covered how to recover fast when you inevitably fail. There's one more piece left, and it's the part that ties every single one of these ideas together into something you can actually carry with you starting today. Here is the single strongest idea in this entire philosophy, and it's simpler than anything else we've discussed. The goal was never to become a man who feels calm all the time, who never struggles, who has somehow transcended difficulty. That version doesn't exist, and chasing it will only make you feel like you're failing at something impossible. The actual goal is to become a man who shows up regardless of what he feels. Not because the feeling doesn't matter, but because the action was never supposed to depend on it in the first place. Think back through everything we've walked through together. Focus your energy only on what's actually yours to control, and let the rest go without a fight. Treat discomfort as information about growth, not a stop sign telling you to retreat. Understand that every small action is a vote for the identity you're actually building, whether or not anyone else is watching. And when you slip, which you will, return to the standard within minutes instead of spiraling into shame that keeps you stuck for days or weeks. None of this requires you to become a different person overnight. It requires you to become slightly more consistent than you were yesterday, and to protect that consistency the way you'd protect anything else that actually matters to you. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire and buried children and fought wars and still found 10 minutes most mornings to write these same reminders to himself because he understood something most people miss. The work is never finished. There is no arrival point where the discipline becomes unnecessary. There is only the daily choice to show up again, and then again, for as long as you're alive to make it. That's actually the most hopeful part of everything we've covered today. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need a perfect track record behind you. You only need the next action, done in front of you, right now, today. That's genuinely available to every single person watching this, regardless of where you're starting from or how many times you've started over before. I'm Mental Fortress, and if this gave you something you can actually use today, that's exactly what this channel exists for. If you want more of this kind of thing, breaking down not just what the Stoics said, but exactly how to apply it in an ordinary modern life, Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you in the next video.